Part 2. Potentiality within the yiktol. One of the principal connotations found in many yiktol uses involves the notion of potentiality. The feature that's helpful to observe about this is that when a statement involves the notion of potentiality, it is inherently uncertain. Consider, for example, the statement, Joab ought to travel. Whether or not he will travel remains uncertain. We only know that as far as the speaker is concerned, he feels that Joab should travel. And so it is an expression of obligation, at least from the speaker's point of view. Yiktol would be the conjugation of choice to express this notion of obligation. It would be rendered in Hebrew, Yoav Yelech, Yoav Yelech. You can see a similar expression in the example from Psalm 32 below. This exploration of potentiality within the yiktol will be divided into 3 sections. First, potentiality as modal in Part 2.1. Modal means related to mood. Part 2.2 will explore potentiality as volitional. This involves examples where one person's will is imposed upon another. And Part 2.3 will explore potentiality as telic, or related to purpose. Part 2.1, potentiality as modal. Here is where we find expressions of capability, of permission, of possibility, of deliberation, of obligation, and of desire. Let's begin with an illustration of the modal connotation capability. This example comes from Psalm 38. Va'ani checheresh lo eshma. Va'ani checheresh lo eshma. Eshma is yiktol, but rather than a simplistic translation, I will not hear, we rather should understand that the psalmist is saying, I am unable to hear. I have not this capability. I cannot hear. The next concept involves permission. Genesis 42:37 serves as an example of this. A later portion of the same verse serves as an example for the next concept, possibility. But first, permission. Et shnei vanai tamit, imlo avienu elecha. Et shnei vanai tamit, imlo avienu elecha. Tamit is yiktol. It means kill. And here the speaker is saying, you may kill. That is, I give you permission to kill. Rather than translating it simplistically, you will kill. The concept of possibility may be detected in the second yiktol verb of the same example, avienu, avienu. Taken simplistically, it would mean with the negation, if I will not bring him back. A better understanding of this injects the notion of possibility, if I do not bring him back. Since this event is couched as part of a conditional statement, a protasis, we do not know whether it will happen or not, but it might happen. It is possible. So rendered, if I do not bring him back. Also illustrating possibility is the example from Genesis 34. Va'asher tomru elai etain. Va'asher tomru elai etain. Notice the verb tomru. It is yiktol. It is best understood not as you will say or stipulate to me, but rather you may say. This is based on the context with the term va'asher, meaning here, whatever you may say or stipulate to me. Interestingly enough, we find another yiktol, etain, at the end. And here it is best rendered with the simple future indicative, I will give. The connotation of deliberation generally occurs in the context of questions. We find an example of this in 2 Samuel 2. Ha-e'ele be'achat arei Yehuda? Ha-e'ele be'achat arei Yehuda? E'ele alone would mean I will go up, but here we find it in a question. So appropriately you see the italicized word interpolated, should I go up into any of the cities of Judah? The connotation of obligation may be seen in this excerpt from Psalm 32. Ve'orcha v'derech zu telech. Ve'orcha v'derech zu telech. Telech is a yictol verb. Rather than translating it as an indicative, the road which you will travel, it makes more sense to detect here the notion of obligation, the road which you ought to travel. The last modal connotation involves the notion of desire. An example may be found in 1 Samuel 21. Im ota tikach lecha, kach. Im ota tikach lecha, kach. Here the yictol verb we're interested in is tikach. You will take, literally. However, since it's extended as an offer, it makes more sense to recognize this as want to take. Notice that the notion of desire is connoted by the yictol, even though it does not represent a separate, independent word in the Hebrew. It's embraced by the yictol. Part 2.2, potentiality as volitional. This volitional connotation of the yictol will remind you of the modal category that we just explored, labeled obligation, with this difference. The volitional examples are more insistent. For that reason, you will find the word must offered as a translational option in these examples. The volitional option may be either positive, as in the first example, or negative. Consider the first an example of positive instruction, which comes from Leviticus 19. Mipnei sheva takum. Mipnei sheva takum. What we want to realize here is that the yictol verb takum should not simply be understood as you will rise, but rather with a legislative feel to it, as a positive instruction, you must rise. The volitional connotation can take a negative form as well, as we see in the example from Exodus 20. Lo ta'aseh lecha fesel. Lo ta'aseh lecha fesel. Ta'aseh is yictol, but rather than rendering it simply as future indicative, you will not make, it makes more sense to fit within the legislative context of this passage, where many rules and regulations are being passed down, and consequently render it, you shall not make, or better yet, you must not make for yourself. Part 2.3, potentiality as telek, that is, related to purpose. Oftentimes, we are assisted in recognizing that a particular yictol usage is telek, or purpose-related, when it is preceded by a word such as lema'an, meaning so that, or a word such as pen, meaning lest. You'll see that in these two examples, the first with lema'an, the second with pen. The first example comes from Exodus 4. Lema'an ya'aminu ki nir'a elecha Adonai. Lema'an ya'aminu ki nir'a elecha Adonai. Taken in isolation, we would suppose that the yictol form ya'aminu should be rendered they will believe. But since it's preceded by lema'an, so that, it's more understandable to render ya'aminu as so that they may believe, not so that they will believe. In this notion, lema'an expresses purpose. It is telek. The next illustration comes from Exodus chapter 20. Ve'al yedaber imanu Elohim pen namut. Ve'al yedaber imanu Elohim pen namut. This illustrates the use of pen, meaning lest. A similar term, levilti, would also signal lest and would help us recognize a telek or purpose-related usage of the yiktol. In this verse from Exodus 20, namut is yiktol, but we do not want to render it simply lest we will die. Better in English to omit the word will and render it lest we die with a sense of lest we may die. Part 3. Coherence of varied meanings within the yiktol. There is no simple answer accounting for why these varied meanings are at home within one form, the yiktol. Scholars have debated this over the centuries. While a consensus has not yet been reached, this conjugation seems to cohere around the notions of events that are either ongoing on the one hand or potential in nature on the other. And this stands in contrast to events that are definite, confined, or sure to materialize. Please refer to the corresponding appendix section for a broader discussion of this topic. Part 4. Suggestions for navigating the various yiktol meanings. Although on the one hand the information you've just received may seem to present you with a bewildering array of options, on the other hand, please be aware that some of these connotations constitute the richest insights that you will bring to your reading of the Hebrew Bible. So let's go through some steps that will help you navigate this array of options. First, begin by inferring for the yiktol a simple meaning cast in future time. This is a good foundational starting point. Next, if the context will not allow a future indicative translation, then recall that the yiktol at times may best be rendered as past or as present, provided that we employ one of the enriched meanings unique to the yiktol. And by this we have in mind meanings such as the iterative, that is, occurring over and over again, or incipient, that is, beginning to do something. Those are not the only ones, but illustrative of the kind of enriched meaning that we want to harvest, reflecting and honoring the fact that the writer has cast it as a yiktol. To put this second point another way, we may say that we are being faithful to the yiktol form that's before us if we reflect it in our translation in one of several ways. One of those ways may be the future indicative, if that fits the context. Another way may be expressing it as past, provided that, along with expressing it as past, we recognize that it has a connotation such as iterative past or incipient past. Similarly, in the present, iterative present or incipient present. Again, iterative and incipient are only representative of some of the special connotations that are available to us within the yiktol. Letter C. Notice particles and use them to your advantage. In particular, notice if the conditional particle im or lu precedes the yiktol. Sometimes ki can also signify an if clause, that is, a protasis. When this happens, it generally allows or even encourages us to favor the present tense over the future tense for the yiktol term that's governed by im or lu or ki. Step D, be attentive to the surrounding genre. In particular, be attentive if the surrounding material has a legislative tone to it. Is it thick with instructions? If so, then we should experiment with the tone of injunction, as in the example from Leviticus 19. Step E, periodically remind yourself of the modal options. It may be helpful to jot down in a convenient place the terms such as can, may, should, or ought, so that you may quickly consult them and remind yourself that these are options within the Yiktol. Letter F. Consult solid Bible translations and scholarly sources. We want to caution ourselves before proceeding too far with a novel rendition. We should check a responsible Bible version to see if what we've come up with seems to fit, or if in fact others may have hit on this option ahead of us. This can be confirming. As we conclude this exploration of the various connotations available within the Yiktol conjugation, don't be surprised if you feel a bit overwhelmed by all the options before you. Go over the material again and repeatedly so that you become aware of what the options are, and then enjoy the richness that this opens up to you as you explore connotations available within the Yiktol.